Hi. So, are you looking to solve baseband issues on an iPhone? Um, I've got an iPhone 13 here today where its cellular and Wi-Fi stopped working. Let me show you. I'm going to unlock the phone. Hmm, Okay. So, if you do star hash 06 hash, it doesn't pull up IMEI. Cellular says no service. And Wi-Fi is grayed out. So that confirms um, an issue with the sandwich board. So first step is to split the sandwich board. Let me show you how. Okay, so the first step to splitting the iPhone sandwich board is to put it on the bottom heater. I like to set my bottom heater to 190 Celsius. And then before the bottom heater warms up and gets up to temperature, I like to apply a little bit of flux around the edge of the sandwich board. What the flux does is it just helps the solder flow better, and I think it aids it in the split, keeps from getting too many oxidized solder pads. Because if the solder pads get oxidized, it takes much more effort to clean them and get them looking nice and shiny. All right, so remember, the bottom heater is set to 190 Celsius. We're going to wait for the bottom heater to get up to temperature, and then we'll go from there. All right, so now that the bottom heater is at temperature, we are going to split the sandwich board. So the bottom heater is set to 190 Celsius. The hot air is set to 350 Celsius at 60 airflow and no nozzle. Let us begin. Now this part is always tricky. You need to make sure you keep the hot air moving at all times so that you don't overheat the board and float it. Insert your tool at the seam or the crack between the sandwich board, and as the solder melts, it will just slide in. Keep the hot air moving the whole time. There, I see it melting. Now we split, focus the heat at the back, and it's off. All right, it looks like we have no pulled pads, which is excellent. Excellent. Okay, let's turn off the bottom heater, and then we'll inspect the motherboard and the sandwich board under the microscope. All right, so the sandwich board looks okay. I don't see any broken solder pads. Taking a closer look at the CPU, I don't see any signs of overheating or floatage, which is good. It means we split this board as safely as possible. Looking at the backside of the board near the NAND, everything looks good. The PMIC is under the shield. That's also most likely safe. Excellent. Board is good. Let's get rid of this thermal paste, because that's just gonna get everywhere and become gross. Perfect. That wasn't much. Now let's take a look at the bottom board, the RFID board. Now you see what I mean. These are the oxidized pads that were fully disconnected. That's why they look so brown and dirty. And that's why the baseband on this phone wasn't working properly. We do have a couple of pulled pads here. 1, 2. We will check the board view and confirm that these aren't important. And yeah, when I inspected the board the first time, I clearly missed it. So we've got 2 here. Let's check those and see if they are for the, if they have anything to do with baseband. I don't think so, but you never know. Okay, let's get rid of the thermal paste here. The reason it's important to get rid of this thermal paste is when you're putting the sandwich board back together, this just gets in the way. It's too thick, so the board doesn't sit properly, and then you'll end up with all sorts of problems. It's easier to just remove it completely. Excellent. We got most of it off. Perfect. You can clean the rest with a cloth. All right, so the next step for this repair is we're gonna tin these pads and then braid them, make them nice and flat, and then we'll test it in the jig. Let's continue. All right, so the next step with the sandwich board repair is we need to prep this board for testing. Now, I did check those 2 pads. They're both VDD main. So, and the other pads in that area are intact, so we don't need to repair them. So I'm still confident that this Wi-Fi and baseband stopped working because of cold solder joints between the top board and the bottom board. And in order to confirm and verify that, we're going to braid the top and bottom board, clean all the old solder off, and then test it in the testing jig. So to braid the top and bottom board, you could just apply flux and then go with the iron and copper and try and pick all the solder up. However, the lead-free solder does not melt very well. So it's a huge pain trying to braid that before you tin it. So what I like to do is apply some flux to the board and then tin all of the high temperature pads with low melt. Now you can see here, these 2 pads in the corner, they're proving to be very stubborn because they're oxidized. So we're gonna come back to them later. Let's just tin the entire bottom board while making sure we apply plenty of low melt solder. We're gonna pick up all of the excess with a braid, so you don't have to worry too much about it right now. All right, so now those 2 stubborn guys, we're gonna have to deal with them. They're not bad, like the braiding helped, but not fully. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna add a bit more flux on those pads. Then we'll add a bit more low melt solder. And we'll see if it will take the solder now. There we go, perfect. Okay, we did not need to scratch them. If it hadn't taken solder, then the next step would have been to scratch those pads, but scratch that. We don't need to do it. Ha ha. I'm going to quickly complete braiding the rest of this board. I might speed up this part of the footage. You'll have to let me know. Now we're going to have to add more flux and solder at the top, and then while we're at it, we're going to trim off our braid and get rid of the part that's now saturated with solder. All right, so those pads have taken solder quite nicely. They're still a little stubborn, but when we reball them, they should be okay. Well, see, the thing is, you don't want solder sitting on top of oxidation because then it won't bind properly and they'll break much easier. So it's a good idea to gently scratch off the oxidation with your iron until the entire pad is nice and shiny. I could use a smaller iron for this purpose, but because this is working, we're just gonna continue with this. However, if you find your iron is too big and you're unable to make contact with the pad properly, then it's a good idea to switch your iron to one that is the right size. Now, extra flux always helps flow the oxides away from the pad. So if it's proving stubborn, it's a good idea to add more flux or to clean the board first, then add more flux and solder. Usually that does the trick. I think that's good enough. Let's try again. All right, gonna have to clean it, add more solder. Yeah, see, it's not bad. Let me zoom in. Just a couple of specks. But genuinely, it's those cold solder joints that break off in time and then it stops working. So right now, if I were to just solder it back on, it would probably be fine, but it does stop working in time. They become brittle and break off because there's not as much surface area holding them to the board. So if you're doing this repair, it's better to fix these solder joints properly where they're nice and not oxidized, and then continue with the rest of the repair. Looks like It might work this time. Let's find out. Beautiful. There we go. Those were some of the most stubborn oxidized pads I have ever seen. Okay, the braid is getting saturated again, so we're gonna cut the excess off. All right, just that little bit at the top, and then we can clean it. All right, now that we have braided the bottom board, let's clean it quickly. Now to clean it, I just like to use a microfiber cloth and some rubbing alcohol. That usually works very nicely. Now I can't stress how important it is to work clean, because right now it doesn't look bad, but trust me, as the flux sits there and then just collects dust, and uh, over time it will also oxidize and degrade. The board just looks awful. I have had motherboards come back where they weren't cleaned properly after being soldered on, and they just look atrocious. A toothbrush really helps get in the nooks and crannies, and it gets rid of all of the flux. Well, you got to add liberal amounts of rubbing alcohol in there. It's what it does is it mixes in with the flux, and then you can mop it up with a clean microfiber cloth. Let me demonstrate. All right. Now that we have a clean cloth, we wipe up our desk, and we I didn't leave my keys in here, did I? You don't look like he's Okay, so the next step now is to tin and braid the top board. So we've done the exact same thing. We applied a bunch of flux to the uh, top board, and now I'm going to apply low melt solder to all of the solder pads. And then we will just braid it with the desoldering braid. And if we have any stubborn or oxidized pads, we should be able to uh, do the same thing and clean them up. Now, those two pads, the VDD main pads that are disconnected, I don't believe we need to repair those, because there are 4 others in that area that do the exact same job. And there are other spots on the board where VDD main comes up as well. So this should not be an issue. However, if this does not work in the jig, then we will troubleshoot and try to figure out if it is a disconnected baseband chip or if it is those pads. The way I would approach it at that point would be, I would first fix those pads because it would be easier, and then check it again. And then if it still doesn't work, then I would reball baseband and Wi-Fi. And then if it still doesn't work, I would cry. I mean, if it still doesn't work, then there's some electronic troubleshooting we can do, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. If we get to it. Now you got to be careful when tinning these pads in the center. There are a lot of components on this side that can either get picked up by the iron or you can bridge them and then you'll have problems. So just be careful. We'll fill that boy up. So what I like to do is I like to just use the edge of my iron. And if you angle it just a little bit so that it touches both pads as you pass the braid over it, that should keep the braid away from the components on the board and just let you pick up the excess solder only. Now my braid is pretty well saturated, so it's leaving behind streaks. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna compress the tip a bit. We'll add some extra flux in here. All right, that's good. It's picked up the majority of the solder. Now let's clean the board and then we'll test it in the jig. So first we'll use the microfiber cloth to pick up all the stubborn bits of flux from around the area where we were soldering. And then we'll clean it with a toothbrush and alcohol. And we might use a bit of compressed air to blow everything away. I'll clean the bottom board again until it is perfect and there's no flux left on it. And then we'll test it. Excellent. This looks pretty clean. Gonna get rid of this hair. Go away, hair. Go away. There we go. Holy moly. That was a long hair. Oh, my dog hair. Man. All wrapped up in it. Wow. So much hair. Everywhere. Okay, now the board is clean. Let's wipe the back side and inspect it. Okay, the board looks good. Let's inspect the bottom board. Okay, bottom board looks good. I'm going to wipe the solder pads once more with IPA. And then we'll test it in the jig. Man, I've said that so many times. I'll just say, and then we'll test it. Okay. Board is clean. Okay, so we're going to use the eye socket testing jig to do this. We're going to first put the bottom board in here. Then we'll put the middle layer. And then the top. Ouch. All right, so I have the phone set up in the testing jig. It's connected to the DC power supply. I'm going to connect a screen to it, and we'll power it on and test it and see if baseband works in the testing jig. If it works in the testing jig, then it confirms... Ooh, I was connecting it to the wrong spot. Sorry about that. If it works in the testing jig, it confirms that the baseband was not working because of cold solder joints, and just reballing the sandwich board is going to fix it. So in this regard, the testing jig is very helpful, because if we did not have it, then the only option would be to reball the entire sandwich board before we would be able to verify if it works or not. So that would just make the repair not feasible. Here, we can at least verify what the issue is before we fix it. I'm going to prompt it to boot with my tweezers. The second pin. Of course, these tweezers are too thick. So let's do it with these. Oh, my DC power supply is off. Let me switch that on. Okay, now I'm going to prompt it to boot at the power button by shorting the power pin to ground and holding it for about a few seconds. And I held it too long. Let me try again. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4,000, 6,000. There we go. We have our logo, which is excellent. Okay, the phone's booted fully. Let me put the code in. There we go. All right, now let's try *#06#. And we have IMEI. Excellent, excellent. So this confirms that the no baseband was because of cold solder joints. Now let's check and see if Wi-Fi is working. And look at that, Wi-Fi is no longer grayed out. So reballing this board is going to fix the phone. Excellent. I'm gonna put the testing jig away safely. Now let us proceed with the sandwich board reball. I'm going to show you my technique for reballing sandwich boards. Now on the iPhone 13, the stencil will warp and buckle, and it says not to apply direct heat. So with this one, we will have to use the peel method. Now, when I'm using the peel method, I like to use super wet paste. Now, this paste has been sitting on my tool for a while. You can see it's super dry. Focus. There we go. You can see the paste. I mean, it's not super dry, but it's dry. And even the paste on here, it's not wet, see? Like, it's pretty dry. This would be okay for normal reballing, but definitely not okay for trying to reball a sandwich board with a peel method. So what I like to do, and this is also a good way to get some use out of the old solder paste that's sometimes stuck on the sides of the bin. So here we're gonna we're gonna wipe the excess paste, or we're gonna collect whatever paste we want on our tool, like so. I'm gonna make sure this is clean, gotten everything off of this, because we're gonna be using this spatula to apply the paste. We're gonna be using this spatula to prepare the paste. So now that I have all my paste that I wanna use on here, there's way more than we'll need, but this will work for later too. What we're gonna do now is I'm gonna apply a little bit of solder flux to it. So now I've applied a decent amount of solder flux. And now let us go ahead and mix it in. So I'm gonna find a bit of weight to make sure it doesn't, make sure my tool doesn't move. There we go. This 1 pound piece of copper should do. Okay, so I have my hot air set to 120 Celsius. I'm gonna do airflow at 40. And then we're gonna use this toothpick to mix it in. It's gonna take a second for the flux to melt. Now, the important key is the right consistency. You gotta make sure your flux is flowy, but not too flowy. Now, it's really hard to just try and mix the right amount of flux in there so you have the right consistency. So what I like to do is I like to saturate it with flux and then just wipe off the excess. So let me show you. I'm gonna add more flux until everything is flowing nicely. Because right now its texture is quite grainy. Let me see if I can zoom in. All right, let's try and mix this in once more. Now we have enough flux. As you can see, everything is nice and liquid and it is flowing. Now what I like to do is try and move all of this flux on the edges and make sure it is also, move all of the paste around the edges and make sure it is also mixed in with the flux nicely. All right. Now with our refreshed paste, I believe we are ready to solder the sandwich board. We do have a couple of steps left. So first thing would be, let's pick up the drips that have fallen. We're going to move all of this paste into the center, like so. I hope that was in focus. I probably didn't have that pointed at the camera, but here we go. So once you've made sure you've collected all of the flux off the paste in one spot, we're now gonna use this tissue paper and pick up the excess flux like so. You're gonna fold the tissue paper over once, press it in, and that way you pick up all of the excess flux. Now, you want to make sure that you still leave it quite wet. Like, it should be that consistency. Here, let me poke it and show you. So you see, it's wet and moves easily, but not too wet. All right, now let us prepare the board. Wait, we've already prepared the board. Okay, so we're going to use the reballing stencil to do this. So I have the board in the jig right now. And then this is the stencil on top. Once you've made sure that everything is lined up nicely, I'm going to use the microscope and spread some paste. All right, gathered a bunch of paste on my tool. Let us proceed. Making sure the stencil is nice and flush. We'll start at the bottom and then work our way up to the top. Ooh, this is so moving. Okay, gonna hold it down and then try not to move it. Now, because the paste is wet, we need to be careful and not apply too much pressure. Because if I apply too much pressure, the paste is gonna squeeze out from underneath the stencil, and then instead of even pads, I'll just end up with a big squishy mess. And I do need to press the stencil down in order to make sure it's not riding too high when I put the paste on. And that also keeps the paste from squeezing out from underneath. Ideally, you want to have a successful reball in one go. Because if you don't, it just needlessly prolongs the repair. Now you got to make sure you apply even pressure as you put the paste on. And you got to try and make sure you don't move the stencil too much. I just moved mine, quite upset about that. Hopefully that has not caused any problems. We'll find out. And we're committed now. There's no point in backing out at this point. Because even if we have an uneven reball, the steps to fixing it are the same, which is we would need to reflow the whole thing, pick up the solder using a braid, and then come back to it, and then you reball it again. Oh, perfect. We got all the solder from there.
Oh, okay. Nice part. Yeah.
All right, now that we have deposited the solder, we're gonna just press the solder flat in through the stencil by applying even pressure. See that part of the stencil is lifted up. So I'm not going to press too much in that area. Don't want to deposit extra solder.
Thank you guys. That's lucky.
All right, now that we have put the paste on the stencil and pressed it flat, we're just going to take a quick look. Everything looks good. And now we're going to start from the bottom and peel it off in one smooth motion. That's the trick. Here goes nothing. Beautiful. Beautiful. Let's check the board. Excellent. If you look at the board, you'll see all of the paste is evenly deposited. Now, even these spots at the bottom where it looks like there's a little bit too much, we should be okay. When we flow the paste, it should form itself into balls nicely. So now we're going to flow that by using 265 Celsius at 60 airflow. That'll be more than enough. We will start, actually we'll reduce our airflow to 40 because I don't want, and I'll increase temperatures to 280. It's because I do not want to flow, I don't want there to be too much air pressure because that will cause the solder to flow too much. There we go, see? Perfect. Let us continue with the rest of the board. Perfect. That is a perfect reball. Now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna clean up the excess solder from in between these pads, because if I zoom in with my microscope, you'll see that there are some tiny, tiny specks of solder in there. So we're gonna clean this, we're gonna flow it, and then we're gonna check it again. So let me get it out of the magnetic holder. Now I'm just going to take one of my microfiber cloths and I'm going to clean it. Okay, now we're going to apply some flux to this board, and then we will reflow these pads once more now that we have cleaned it. And then we'll inspect it and make sure that all the solder balls are nice and even and perfect. All right, so I have completed the reball on the sandwich board, and as you can see, it looks flawless. Absolutely beautiful. We'll inspect the sandwich board under the microscope and make sure that all the pads are even. Now, this step is super important because if you don't have an even reball on the sandwich board, when you're putting the board back on, you could end up with short circuits between, um, well, you could either have a power rail short to ground, which will make the phone not work, or even worse, a power rail could get shorted to a data line, which could kill the device. So it is absolutely important that you check the reball and make absolutely sure that it is perfect. Make sure there's no debris on the board, and you got to make sure that the balls are perfect, which means they have to be the same height and they have to be pristine. That's the one. There's just a bit of debris here. There we go. This reball is perfect. Excellent. Excellent. This should work. Okay, so to put the sandwich board back together, what we're going to do is we're going to put a bit of flux on the sandwich board, and then we're just going to use a paintbrush to brush it evenly across the whole thing. What this does is prevents you from oversaturating the board with flux. Only puts the necessary amount on there, and that way it makes if you put too much flux, it makes cleanup a real hassle, and then also it kind of makes for bad reballs, like the chip or the board will tend to dance all over the place before it settles. But if you put just the right amount of flux, A, cleanup is much easier, and B, the soldering goes much easier. All right, I'm going to inspect this under the microscope quickly and make sure that the flux has spread evenly. So we have fluxed the board, and it is reballed, and it is on the bottom heater. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put the top board on. We're going to line it up as best as we can. And again, we're going to do this part under the microscope. As long as they're close enough, like a BGA chip, it will pull itself into position, but you still have to get them at least a little bit close. Perfect. Top and bottom board are aligned. Now we'll switch on the bottom heater. I'll set my bottom heater to 175. That should be plenty hot for the low melt. Low melt, the paste that I have melts at 158. Okay, now with the bottom board at temperature, it just beeped. We're going to make sure that the solder has flowed by nudging the board slightly, and it should dance. Excellent. You saw the board wiggled. This camera is probably not going to pick it up, but the microscope did. Now I'm going to turn off the bottom heater, and we will inspect it and make sure that we have no bridges and everything is installed properly. All right, so with the sandwich board soldered back together and the board cooled down, let us power it on with a DC power supply first, and let's see if it works. Now, I could power it on with just the battery, but after you've finished working on the board, it's important to use the DC power supply because a live readout of the phone's power draw is a very good way to gauge if you've got problems. Now, what if you've got a power rail shorting to a data line and now you've damaged a chip, but that current spike that could happen will only show up the first time. So that's why it's important to test it with the DCPS first. Make sure your standby current draw is good, and then you can power it on with a battery. So with all that being said, let's see if this works. So I'll put the board back in its housing. I've connected all the flex cables too. Let's just plug it into the DC power supply, and we'll see. So I have my DC power supply set to 4 volts at 4 amps. Let's press the power button. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press the power button quickly. I'm going to press it and release it. If there is a short circuit, it will show a higher than normal current draw. Right now, it should spike up to about 100 to 200 and then back to 0. So let's see. Excellent. So far, so good. Now let's press and hold. And we have Apple logo. Excellent. The phone worked. All right, so the first hurdle's passed. The sandwich board reball worked. Now, as long as the reball is good, cellular and Wi-Fi should work. Because you have to remember, it worked in the testing jig. All right, now with the code in, let's check IMEI. And we have IMEI. That is fantastic. And let us check Wi-Fi. Beautiful. The device sees all the Wi-Fi networks in the area. Fantastic. Fantastic. Let's just connect it to the Wi-Fi network. Okay, it is connected to Wi-Fi. Let's make sure the internet is working. Perfect. Google is working. Internet is working. Now that we have verified that the phone works, let's just connect the phone with its battery. We'll pop a working SIM card in the phone and we'll make sure cell service is actually working. All right, so I have the phone back in its housing. And as you can see, the Wi-Fi works and the cell service works as well. The phone is fixed and working. And here, let's make a quick phone call. You can always reach us at 705-920-0747. And the phone rings. Device is fixed. If you ever need motherboard repair services, please don't hesitate to contact us at repairtechrx.ca or send us a message on Facebook, or you can always give us a call. And if you learned something from this video, please like and subscribe.